3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Innovating for the Earth, the story of Calix, an Australian company, their technology and the difference it's making. Today we're discussing direct air capture and Calix's subsidiary Leilac's new partnership with direct air capture company Heirloom. So direct air capture is the process of using technology to pull carbon dioxide out of the air. How does it work? How does Heirloom do it? Why do we need it? Once the carbon dioxide is pulled out of the air, how is it stored? Is it safe? Is it affordable? If not, will it ever be? And can the prospect of using direct air capture be used as an excuse by some to keep on emitting? How will the Heirloom and Leilac technologies work together, and how will the development of this technology fit in with other decarbonisation efforts? So many questions. I'm joined by Dan Rennie, who returns to Innovating for the Earth. When we first spoke, Dan was Calix's General Manager of Cement Decarbonisation, and we talked a bit about what Calix was doing in carbon capture, utilisation and storage. Dan now has a new job at a new company. He's the CEO of Leilac. So he's left Calix? Well, kind of. You know, some TV shows have spin-offs like Better Call Saul was a spin-off from Breaking Bad. Leilac is kind of like a spin-off from Calix. Calix owns 93% of Leilac. US investor Carbon Direct has the other 7%. Leilac has a license to use the core Calix technology and is using it to help decarbonise the cement and lime industries. Welcome back, Dan.
Oh, thank you very much for having me back, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you, James.
Good. Now, before we get into direct air capture, tell me a bit about Leilac and how it's using Calix's core technology.
So, thank you very much for that introduction. Leilac is, as you mentioned, is using Calix's core technology to really accelerate and focus on the commercialization of its application to capturing CO2. Initially focused on the cement and lime industries. It's got a history going back to 2015 now, where it was originally granted EU funding to see if this technology could be applied to the cement and lime industries. And with that funding, we built the Leilac 1 pilot in Belgium that we talked about last time, which has got the capacity to capture 25,000 tons of CO2 of this unavoidable emissions. So you're quite right. When we last spoke, this was still very much part of Calix, but this is such an important technology. The idea was to really have a company focused on and dedicated to ensuring its commercial rollout as quickly as possible. And I've got the great pleasure and honor of being its CEO. So the technology itself is really, again, focused on these unavoidable process emissions from limestone. It's a very efficient way that effectively keeps the CO2 pure as it's released from this limestone. Limestone loses almost half of its weight as CO2. That's why the cement and lime industries are hard to abate industries. And the Leilac process really just does that by having these heated steel tubes, which allow this CO2 to be kept pure. And it just doesn't have a high energy penalty. It doesn't require additional chemicals or processes, which is what the approach that most carbon capture processes do have. So we've got this benefit of this very elegant technology, and we're really targeting very low-cost decarbonisation solutions for the lime and cement industry. So that's a bit of an overview of Leilac and why we're here.
Goodo, thank you. Also joining us is Shashank Samala, CEO of Heirloom, direct air capture company. Welcome. Thanks, Shashank.
Thanks for having me, James.
Now, what is direct air capture and why do we need it?
So direct air capture is a carbon removal technology that helps us remove CO2 that we've already spewed into the atmosphere. Humanity has emitted about 2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide into the air over the last couple of 100 years. And carbon removal and direct air capture is really the closest thing we have to a time machine, because we can turn back the clock on climate change. We remove CO2 from the air, which is different than removing CO2 from a smokestack. This is about legacy emissions, and this is about the hardest to abate emissions. Why do we need it? The United Nations and the climate scientists have made it very clear in the 2018 IPCC report. In order to stop climate change, we can't just end greenhouse gas emissions. We also have to remove billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the air. Like this is a climate math problem at this point. There is just too much CO2 in the air, and the pace at which we are decarbonizing is much slower than what the world needs to be doing. So the science is clear. We need to remove billions of tons of CO2.
So why is direct air capture for some controversial?
So some claim that it is distracting because it could be using renewable energy that could otherwise be used to decarbonize industry, or it could be used as a license to continue to pollute. And my answer to that, just like other climate scientists made this clear, is unfortunately we don't have a two-way path here, and unfortunately we don't have a choice. This is a must-do. I wish we didn't start Heirloom. I wish we didn't have to remove billions of tons of CO2 from the air. I wish we didn't just open this facility that we just did last week. I wish none of those things were needed. We are here, and we started this company, and many others in the space have as well, because we do at this point. It's a climate math problem, and if you want to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, this is just a must-have. Just like 10, 15 years ago, we said, hey, renewable energy needs to be deployed much, much, much faster. Today, even 4 or 5 years ago, this was on the fringes, right? Many people thought we wouldn't need this, but scientists now have made this very clear. So yeah, we don't have a choice.
Yeah, any thoughts on that, Dan?
Oh, completely agree. And it really isn't taking away the need to decarbonize or do everything that we can. It's just everything needs to be done as hard and as quickly as possible. And as Shashank was mentioning, none of the IPCC models work without this. So it really is a very important tool that we need to a lever that we need to pull as hard as possible, along with everything else.
Yeah. And Shashank, what's different about your company, Heirloom's approach to direct air capture?
Yeah, so for us, when I first got into this, just to give a background to myself, I grew up in Southeast India. I saw firsthand impacts of climate change. I've seen people who have contributed the least to climate change suffering the most from its impacts. I was terrified to consider how much hotter the heat waves could get and how much longer the droughts could last. And, for me, this mandate by scientists was very personal when I first started my journey about 5 years ago. And, I looked at solutions across the space. I'm not a chemical engineer. I'm not a PhD in chemical engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer by background. So I basically read a lot of papers, like how do you remove carbon from the air? This thing that is so dilute in the air, right? 1 molecule out of every 2,500 molecules. How do you capture that? And there's 2 constraints. One was this needs to be done at around $100 per ton to have any meaningful impact on climate. It needs to be affordable by society, or else this won't be adopted. That is just fundamental. $100 a ton. And there's not a lot of things in the world that cost $100 a ton, by the way. Like if you just think about, it's like what costs $100 a ton? It's like sand and concrete, right? Like things that have gravel, things that have lots of learning curves, have scaled up a lot, have many years of research and development behind them, and then it's very vast scale, costs $100 a ton. So, you really need to be clever as to how you remove carbon at $100 a ton. And the other one is we need to be removing billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the air. So those 2 constraints really helped me narrow down what approach I pursued. I looked at many different artificial sorbents, these custom sorbents that are really good at being selective for CO2. But I just was not satisfied with the cost curves and just how expensive those sponges, those custom sorbents were. And finally found this one approach that uses limestone, which is thirsty for CO2 in the air. But the problem is it's kind of slow. So, we had funded some research to see if we can give some superpowers to limestone to pull carbon much faster than it otherwise would. And it ended up working. We were able to get it from months, what would otherwise take months or years, down to about now 3 days. It was many years of, R&D that got us there. And now we basically have a solution that just puts a bunch of rocks, cheap rocks. Limestone costs $30 to $40 a ton. And we can actually recycle it in our process, which we'll get to using the Leilac kiln with Dan's company. So you just put a bunch of rocks on a bunch of trays and expose them to the air, and this stuff sucks up CO2 from the air, and we reuse the limestone.
Wow. So Heirloom uses limestone to capture carbon dioxide from the air. Dan, Leilac heats limestone and captures the carbon dioxide in the manufacture of cement and lime. Can you explain how your two technologies fit together, Dan? Is the technology you're using with Heirloom different to your cement and lime technology?
It's exactly the same. And that's why it's such a neat fit. It's a technology that's been designed for the cement and lime industry, and it's about releasing the CO2 once it's been absorbed by that lime in a concentrated form, which means that it can be safely transported and permanently sequestered, so it doesn't reach the atmosphere.
Okay.
So,
Shashank, how they fit together?
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful marriage, right? We needed to find a solution that used renewable energy, is able to use electricity to break up limestone after it captures CO2 from the air, so that we can take that CO2, compress it, store it underground, so it doesn't come back out, and then reuse the calcium oxide, expose it to the air, and put it back into the kiln. So, it's a foundational technology to enable this direct air capture application.
So you mentioned putting it into the ground. Can you tell us a bit more about the transport and storage of the CO2? How does that work?
Yeah. So, let's take a step back a minute. For folks who are new to this, carbon dioxide is a long-living molecule in the air. It stays in the air for about 1,000 years after you emit it. So it's really important, if you were to capture it, to store it somewhere that is permanent, so it doesn't come back out, or else we're just pushing this climate change problem into the future, so that our kids and grandkids have to deal with it. So, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. We can sequester the CO2 in applications like concrete, where you can essentially cure the CO2 in the concrete making process. And Heirloom has done that earlier this year, became the first company to store CO2 from the air into concrete. And then the other way is to store it underground. This is something that oil and gas companies have done for many, many, many decades safely and permanently. And they used it for enhanced oil recovery to store CO2 underground to recover more oil. Obviously, we will be doing only storing and not recovering oil. And we have lots of data to show that there's no leakage from that for the many, many decades humanity has been doing it, and we're going to do the same thing here.
Dan, it's interesting, isn't it? You create one innovation like direct air capture, then you've got to create all these other innovations down the track to transport and store it and do everything else. What in terms of transport and storage, what technology exists and what more is needed to do it more efficiently?
Well, CO2 has been transported one way or another for many, many decades. In fact, in the United States, it's, as Shashank was mentioning, it's been that there are 9,000 miles of CO2 pipeline moving CO2 every single day, primarily used for enhanced oil recovery. But for example, since the 1990s, CO2 has been stored permanently in saline aquifers, and that the interesting thing about that CO2 is that it actually becomes more permanently, it becomes bound to the storage site that it's been put in over time, so it actually gets more secure over time. But yes, it is an important chain that needs to be considered. It's not a one-stop solution, but this really is addressing this CO2 that is a global problem and affects all industries. So it is just a necessary step. And again, certainly talking for the lime and cement industries, there are different options. There are different means of having different cement mixes or using less clinker, the raw material. But fundamentally, the cement industry expects that it needs to capture and permanently store 1.4 gigatons of CO2 per year by 2050, because there's just no other way of getting there. So yes, transport and storage is that other step, but it is a necessary one for our society.
And would you expect the sophistication of how we do that to increase over the next couple of decades?
Oh, absolutely. And as we support this transport and storage infrastructure as it's deployed, again, there is a huge amount of experience there. There are dozens of projects in operation and under development to enable this on a global basis. But yes, it is something that's very well known. The costs are coming down for transport and storage, and there is no reason why CO2 cannot be stored globally and economically to decarbonize our society. It's been a topic of significant analysis over the years, and there's a huge level of confidence, again, from the IPCC and others.
Shashank, you mentioned that oil and gas companies can use direct air capture. Can you expand on that and explain that a little bit, and explain also how what you do is different?
Yeah, so, Heirloom specifically, our stance on carbon removal and how direct air capture plays a part in overall climate mitigation is specific to us, and it's unique to us. We've made a commitment that our technology and direct air capture will not be used as a fig leaf for fossil fuel extraction or expansion. And we felt when we released these principles, I think what you're referring to, when we released those principles, we felt that this space needed a leadership in values. And as a front runner in this space, we wanted to build a race to the top in terms of standards of deployment. And we call them high road carbon removal principles. And it's really four things. One is our technology. We will never use our CO2 molecules for enhanced oil recovery. And the second one is we don't accept investment from companies whose core business is in oil and gas production, to ensure that our governance is really tied towards our mission, which is to help not just mitigate, but eventually reverse climate change. And for that, you need to both reduce emissions and to remove legacy emissions. The third principle is we will transparently publish all our reporting data around measurement of CO2 to the communities that we deploy in. And then the fourth one is we commit to a robust community engagement so that we develop benefits for the communities that we deploy in. We actually want to lift them and empower them, which is different than what traditionally industry has done, which is go into communities and really create all these really bad health outcomes from, a lot of the places are already overburdened and vulnerable. And when you think about petrochemical and former oil and gas, and we want to do something different. We want to listen, and we want to lift up communities. So, that's our stance on how we think about working with oil and gas.
And as I understand it, your two companies, Heirloom and Leilac, have signed license and collaboration agreements. What happens next?
Let's scale this thing, right? It's super. It's like Leilac and Calix has been working on this technology for, 10, 15 years. So, we get to stand on their shoulders, combine it with our own technology, in removing CO2 from the air. And now, I think it's game time, right? Like we need to, Heirloom has gone from removing a kilogram of CO2 out of a petri dish just over 2 years ago. And now we just launched a facility last week that can capture up to 1 million kilograms of CO2 from the air. So it's a massive scale up. And we're not stopping. We're building something that is orders of magnitude more over the coming years. And and one of the things that it makes possible are innovations and advances that Leilac has made over the last decade or so.
Early projects have been backed by significant US government support. Are you confident the private sector will get involved in the removal of atmospheric CO2?
Yeah, a lot of the focus has recently been on the government support, but in fact, all of our customers, as you may know, we've signed one of the largest contracts in carbon removal with Microsoft. That's worth multi hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's up to 315,000 tons of CO2 that they will be buying from us to help them get to net zero. And there is a recent survey and research developed by Boston Consulting Group that shows we need and a projected demand in 2030 for carbon removal is over 200 million tons. That's just in 7 years, right? And if you think about, it's like now the industry is in the hundreds of thousands of tons, and we have to go to hundreds of millions of tons. Like, is that possible? Where is that demand coming from? Well, if you just look back, when I first got into this about 5 years ago, no one was even thinking about buying carbon removals. It was literally, the industry was zero, and I've seen that pick up from zero to what it is today, where companies like JP Morgan and Stripe and Shopify, Klarna, Microsoft have been buying carbon removals to help them get to net zero, and we're seeing that those markets.
When you say carbon removal, do you mean carbon credits? Is that another way of saying that? Or
that's right.
Different?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So the way these customers think about it is, take Microsoft for example. They have a pledge to get to net zero and actually carbon negative by 2030. And they've done the calculations, and they think the first 60% or so, they will be able to reduce, basically move over to solar and wind and, electrify their transportation fleets. And the other 40% has to come from removing carbon. These are not carbon offsets. These are real carbon removals where you're removing real CO2 from the air and putting it underground. So that's the transition that is happening in this market.
Can we talk about direct air capture and whether it supports or inhibits other decarbonisation efforts? Obviously, you can do more than one thing at one time, and you can have a multiple.
Humans are pretty good at doing multiple things at one time.
Exactly. No, I agree with that. It's more about the allocation of taxpayer funding. Would funding be better directed to more renewable energy generation or more electric vehicles? So yes, of course, we can do lots of things at one time, but taxpayer dollars are, well, I don't know about scarce. They're kind of scarce in an abundant way.
Yeah. So the way I would think about this is as humanity, as countries, as the United States, we have to think about where do we want our country to be in 2035, 2040, 2045? And if you visualize the world then, we need to be deploying lots and lots of renewable solar and wind and hundreds of gigawatts every year. And in addition to that, we also need to be removing the CO2 at the same time. So, and this is an industry that doesn't exist today, a carbon removal industry. So it needs to scale up, and it will take a decade or two to be able to scale to a level where it can be on par with renewables in terms of its impact. So we need to start today. And, in 2030, think about, where the taxpayer dollars are going. In 2030, the renewable energy that direct air capture would use, even in the best case scenarios for scaling DAC, we're still only using less than 0.1% of renewable energy that we need to be deploying every year, right? In terms of dollars, it's insignificant, but it will be important to scale up DAC so that in the 30s and the 40s, we have another meaningful tool in our portfolio of solutions.
Yeah, Dan, thoughts?
Yeah, and it really is a bit of a no regrets approach to be investing in. And taking renewables for as an example, they receive far fewer subsidies than they did in the beginning. There was an initial drive to get their deployment and get their costs down, and that's allowed industry to flourish. And often renewables are far cheaper than conventional or fossil fuel based electricity generation. So that there is no regrets from investing in every approach that can help tackle this issue that we've got with CO2 and all of the other benefits that we have to our society around with it. And it does not just apply for one technology. I think, as we've indicated here, that the actions that are being undertaken in support of Heirloom with its visionary approach to really addressing these, particularly legacy emissions, directly helps the decarbonisation of hard-to-abate industries such as lime and cement, and actually beyond that, because this is also supporting Calix's broader portfolio of activities, which also includes decarbonising iron and steel and transport sectors. So all of those learnings and sharings and advancements are actually helping the broader community. So.
And Dan, what does the partnership with Heirloom mean for Leilac? How will it influence your technology development and other applications?
Oh, it really is hugely important, and it's a great pleasure, actually, because Heirloom's vision and ambition and momentum is key to driving decarbonisation, and it really just helps our deployment and scaling up. And again, that directly benefits the cement and lime industry. The electrification of industry is actually a key plank of the cement and lime industry's 2050 targets to getting to net zero, as well as capturing its carbon. And this is a great way of allowing those learnings to be shared too. So it really is entirely complementary and a great way of accelerating this deployment of this and other decarbonisation approaches. And but it's actually it's a pleasure on a day-to-day basis working with such a motivated and driven team, and we're very aligned, and it's a great joy to work with Heirloom, actually.
So finally, for both of you, I mean, you guys could be, you're engineers, you could be putting your expertise into making a new kind of chocolate biscuit or something that people would enjoy but wouldn't really make the planet any better or assist humanity in any great way. We've got plenty of chocolate biscuits as it is. What does it mean for you personally to be involved in this, and what do you hope it means for communities as you hope, I guess, your technology is used more and more over the next 20 years, Shashank?
Yeah, I think that the thing that deep down fires me up and motivates me is the inequity of the impacts of climate. I think the people who decide things for the world are sometimes in the ivory tower and not understanding what is actually happening in the world, right? Like, the communities I grew up in, my neighborhoods have been flooded completely twice in the last 3 or 4 years, where I grew up in India. And like, those things don't catch, they're not caught in airwaves in the West. But those are happening today. And it is a reminder, each new devastation is a reminder that there is already too much CO2 in the air. Not even getting from, we've emitted the most humanity's ever emitted last year. And, that obviously has to get to net zero, but not only do we need to get to net zero, we have to start removing the CO2 that we've already put in the air, right? So I think this is a century-long battle that we'll face, and personally, I think I'm very lucky and grateful to sort of been given this opportunity to lead a company like this, which directly impacts climate by removing one CO2 molecule at a time. I don't take it for granted. I don't take it, as a sure thing. So it's it's a unique opportunity we have, where we have the entire zeitgeist, customers and investors and policymakers, everyone wanting this to happen. So we're gonna give it our best shot.
Great, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely, and it couldn't be more of an important, difficult challenge facing our society, and we really do have the option and the technology and the vision to really go and really make a substantial difference to this. We now know what the problem is and the impact that humans have had on our environment, and we do want this to be an environment that is a sustainable one, particularly for our children or communities. And it really is a great honor to be working with Heirloom and for this core technology that is intrinsically being designed to be rolled out as part of a just transition. So again, I am also thinking from a cement and lime industry hat on, and all of these work are with the express intent of having a technology that is cheap, affordable, and supports local communities and can be deployed by local communities and supports local economic and social journey on a just and low carbon environment. And so these things do not need to be mutually exclusive. They can work together. We've got the technology that proves they can work together and actually address legacy emissions as well. So it's a hugely exciting time. We've got a wonderful window of opportunity, and we just need to seize it with both hands.
Well, thank you both for your time. We're all in different parts of the world, and not everyone has been doing it at user-friendly hours. So thank you all for getting up early and staying up late. And good luck with your really important collaboration and the difference it will hopefully make over the next bit of future that we get to live in. Thanks to Dan Rennie, the CEO of Leilac, and Shashank Samala, CEO of Heirloom. And thanks for listening to our podcast, Innovating for the Earth, the story of Calix and its technology. Lots of other apps are available.